We will not build a wall.
No, there will not be another foot of wall constructed in my administration.
I'm not for a wall. I'm not for a wall.
Welcome to Fort Pelosi, where Democrats decry walls from within their own heavily guarded razor wire wall. Democrats don't want to protect you because they don't care about you, but they'll spare no expense protecting themselves.
I would say it's clear we need to work more on getting the message out.
When a politician tells you they have a messaging or communications problem, what they really mean is they have a reality problem. And their reality problem is that they created a crisis at our southern border by inviting the entire world to show up and claim asylum. Joe Biden's administration is seeking out those illegal aliens that Donald Trump turned away. We've gone far beyond catch and release. This is recruit and release.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Bryan Fischer.
Mike's going high. Howdy, and welcome to another broadcast edition, brand new broadcast edition, live broadcast edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. I am Bryan Fischer, congenial, convivial, amiable, and effervescent.
As always.
What happened to Bobby? Where was Bobby? Bobby's around, but apparently we've lost some mic here. I didn't want Bobby to miss his lines. This is the highlight of his day.
No, I was with you.
Bobby made it.
Okay, Bobby made it. I guess I just didn't hear it. So anyway,
pulled the plug apart.
All present and accounted for. Jeff and Bobby and Bryan in the house to bring you the content of the day.
As always.
As always.
Just, yeah.
Well played.
Very quickly, encourage you to get podcasts. Download a podcast app on your phone. Subscribe to the Focal Point podcast. You can listen no matter where you live in the world. Listen live at afr.net. You can also live stream the program, video and audio, on our Focal Point Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. You can contact me via email at focalpoint@afa.net. Also coming up on Easter, don't forget you can get a package of He Lives Easter buttons at afastore.net. While you are there, think about ordering up a copy of the Boy to Man book for the father of a 12-year-old boy that you know and love. All right, well, let's quickly jump into the Word of God, is how we typically begin the program, get our nautical bearings. Remember, our nautical chart supplied by the Scripture. So let's, we're in a study of the life of David right now. Now we're up to chapter 16 and 17. The backstory to what we're going to look at today is that David had to flee for his life from Jerusalem because of a coup d'etat that had been orchestrated by Absalom. Remember, David's son Amnon raped and abused Absalom's sister Tamar, completely wrecked her life. She was never the same, and David did nothing. This, as we've seen before, is his besetting sin. He simply could not bring himself to discipline the members of his own family and to confront them with their substandard behavior. Let them get away with things that a responsible father, responsible king would have dealt with. Now, Absalom, from this point forward, hated Amnon because of what Amnon had done to his sister. And he hated David because David didn't do anything about it. So Absalom took matters into his own hands and carried out an act of vigilante justice against Amnon. By the way, Mayor de Blasio's wife in New York is urging people in New York to resort to vigilante justice. It'll be like Charles Bronson and Death Wish. You see somebody being abused, intervene. And one guy did that, took her advice, got killed, got shot by the assailant. That's why we need police, why we need to allow people to be armed to protect themselves in their own defense. Now, there's a lesson that we learn here from the story of Absalom and Amnon and David, and that is this. If civil authority does not deal decisively and publicly and visibly to punish crimes of sexual assault, what do you get? You get more crimes of sexual assault. You go easy on those who commit sexual assault, let rapists off with a slap on the hand. What you're going to get is more rape. You're going to get more sexual assault because it lowers the cultural standard for sex crimes. It lowers the bar to repeat offenses. It lowers the barrier to physical and sexual assault. So Absalom, out of his hatred for David and for Amnon, sent a hit squad to take Amnon out to avenge the incestuous assault on his sister Tamar. The hit squad was successful. That was it for Amnon. So then Absalom launched a coup against his father because he hated his father as much as he hated Absalom. Because his father, David, the king, who was the chief law enforcement officer in the land, had been AWOL when his sister was violated, did nothing. So Amnon launched a coup. David had to flee for his life. He's on the run. Now, part of the dynamic here is Absalom was trusting in the advice of a guy named Ahithophel, and the nation was besotted with him, with Ahithophel, just like progressives today are besotted with Anthony Fauci. Here's what chapter 16, verse 23 says. In those days, the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the word of God. So was the counsel of Ahithophel esteemed. Now, David knew that Ahithophel's counsel would be shrewd and crafty and would help Absalom cement his power. So David figured he needed to launch some kind of countermeasure, so he recruited a man by the name of Hushai the Archite to go to Absalom and lay in some landmines for him. Absalom was a little bit suspicious because he'd been loyal to David, but Hushai said, hey, you're the king, I'm going to follow you. Chapter 17, verse 18, whom the Lord and this people and all the men have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. As I have served your father, so I will serve you. And that satisfied Absalom. So it worked, and Hushai became one of his most trusted advisors. So Absalom, David's on the run now, somewhere hiding out in the south. He asked both of them, Ahithophel and Hushai, what I should do. Ahithophel said, we got to run him to the ground right now. He's worn out. He's on the run. He's discouraged. You give me 12,000 men, Ahithophel says, and I will put him out of your misery. I will just take out David, and I will bring all of the people that went with David back to you. So Absalom thought that was a pretty good idea, decided that's what he was going to do, figured it was a brilliant idea, and in fact, if he'd acted on it, David would have been terminated, and Absalom would have secured the throne for decades. That's when Hushai steps up to protect David, and sandbag Absalom. Says, Ahithophel is giving you really bad advice. You're forgetting that David and his men are mighty men. They are fearless. They are valiant. They are skilled in combat, and they're enraged at you right now. They are like a mother bear who's been robbed of her cubs. Bad time to be tangling with David and his mighty men of valor. You think David's going to be easy to find, but I guarantee you, Hushai says, he's hidden himself in a cave or in a pit, and he's going to ambush your boys, and your soldiers will freak out. Even the valiant men, Hushai says, 17:10, who hears, is even the valiant men whose heart is like the heart of a lion will utterly melt with fear, and David and his men will cut you to ribbons, so you better think of something else to do. And the Bible says that Ahithophel took Hushai's counsel instead of Ahithophel's counsel. That's what Absalom did, took Hushai's counsel instead of Ahithophel's counsel. For the Lord had ordained chapter 17, verse 14, the Lord had ordained, literally, the Lord had commanded to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. God was determined to bring justice to bear on Absalom, and so he was not going to let anything interfere with that. And so he commanded that this effort would be thwarted, this effort to use counsel to entice Absalom into attacking David would fall to the ground. So he picked Hushai's counsel over Ahithophel's counsel. And when Ahithophel saw that, he went home and he hung himself till he was dead. And that's what set the stage for the climactic battle between David and Absalom. You want to hear the rest of the story, be sure to tune in tomorrow. Now, a couple of takeaways here. We see here that God is sovereign in human affairs. He is sovereign in our individual lives. David had prayed that God would turn the counsel of Ahithophel to foolishness, and God answered his prayer. But he answered it, here's the point, he answered it through Hushai. He answered David's prayer through a willing individual. This is often how God answers prayer, raise up someone to serve his purposes, so he carries out his sovereign will, not apart from us, but through us. Now, if Hushai had not been obedient, David would have been cut down. So God's sovereign will was that David's life was to be spared, and he worked through a human instrument, through Hushai and his counsel, to carry out his plan. So if we listen to God and we follow him, he may use us to protect somebody that we care about, help them even right now, so that God's sovereign will be carried out in their lives. So who knows how God may be using somebody else right now in our lives, somebody we don't even know, somebody we don't know what they are doing, but what they are doing right now, God is using them to help fulfill the purpose, help us fulfill the purpose that he has for our lives. You know, and we ought to be sobered by what Ahithophel did when he was replaced, when he got demoted, he got passed over. His sense of his self-worth was tied up in being the advisor to the king. And when he lost that gig, his self-esteem, his image of himself, was so connected to success that he was lost when he lost that gig, had so much wrapped up in success that he couldn't handle it. When it was taken from him, he committed suicide as a result. Well, let's take these things and go to the Lord together in prayer. Lord God, as we read this story of how you frustrated the counsel of Ahithophel through Hushai, we are reminded of your power and ability to carry out your will. You answered the prayer of David that the counsel of Ahithophel would be frustrated, and you did it through a willing individual. It reminds us that you carry out your will not apart from us, but through us. May we each obey your promptings, that you may use us to answer someone else's prayers, even when our nation is in the balance, like it was in this story. Lord, you were even able to blind Absalom's mind to superior counsel in order to protect the life of David. I pray for myself, for everyone right now within the sound of my voice, that we will choose to believe that no one is beyond your reach, and to believe that you will protect us and preserve us until our service for you in this age is completed. Please confuse the counsel of those who intend us harm. May we also take caution from Ahithophel's example, who depended upon success for his sense of worth and purpose, and took his own life when his counsel was rejected. I pray, Lord, that we will give our family and our professional and ministry responsibilities the best that we have to give, yet always choose to trust you with the results. Protect us from having so much wrapped up in success that we cannot handle failure. May we choose life and growth instead. These things we ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. You're listening to Focal Point on American Family Radio. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
This is Focal Point with Bryan Fischer on American Family Radio.
Mics are hot.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. Bryan Fischer is my name. Program again is Focal Point. This is almost hard to believe, but it's a true fact. This is disturbing to a significant degree. The Satanic Temple of Texas has filed suit in a court in Texas to defend its religious right to engage in child sacrifice as a spiritual ritual. So they're arguing on First Amendment grounds. According to the First Amendment, we have the right to the free exercise of religion. You're getting in the way of this with your state-mandated restrictions and regulations on abortion. So the procedure is banned in Texas after 20 weeks unless a life-threatening medical condition is involved. And we want to be able to give birth to babies. We want to be able to abort them if we need to. We want to be able to sacrifice them in a satanic ritual, and your regulations are getting in the way of that. So that's their argument. This is something that's in our satanic ritual. Our founder insisted that we do this, offer child sacrifice. That's where the power is. The shedding of blood is what gives them power. Shedding of innocent blood is what gives them power, kind of a perverse, upside-down mirror image of the sacrifice of Christ. So there's a reminder that Satanic temple, they do believe in child sacrifice. They do believe in the shedding of the blood of an innocent child in order to gain spiritual power, and they're suing for the right to do it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is where it's important to understand what the founders were intending to do when they enacted the First Amendment. This is according to Joseph Story, who wrote the first magisterial history of the Constitution. He was in connection with the founding fathers. The James Madison, the father of the Constitution, was the one who appointed him to office. And he said, look, what the First Amendment was designed exclusively to protect the free exercise of the Christian religion. He said when the founding fathers were crafting the First Amendment, they were not considering, encouraging, even dealing with the other religious traditions. They weren't dealing with Hinduism. They weren't dealing with Mohammedanism. They weren't even dealing with Judaism. Now, I want to hasten to add that those religions have the right, because of our predisposition to liberty, they've got the right to do what they want as long as they don't engage in any illegal or criminal behaviors like child sacrifice, which is what the Satanic Temple wants to do. So the truth is the Satanic Temple has no First Amendment right that it can claim, because the First Amendment was not written by the founders to protect the Church of Satan. It was written by the founders to protect the free exercise of the Christian faith. So that's a sober reality about what we're dealing with in that side of the ledger. All right, here's an interesting story about a guy who was trying to rip off a school in Mississippi. He got stuck hanging from the ceiling. Apparently they were keeping their money up there in the ceiling. He figured that out, or found out about it. So he was going to rip off that stash of money, and the ceiling of this school got stuck, suspended from the ceiling. So he called the cops, called 911. They came and saved his bacon. This is just an interesting little detail. Rush Limbaugh, his death certificate, his official death certificate, says that he was, quote, the greatest radio host of all time, end quote. Can't argue with that. Now, on the COVID front, on the pro-life front, back to that for a second, this is a story from Albuquerque, New Mexico. The organization is Abortion Free New Mexico. And what they have reported, Abortion Free Mexico, they've reported that there have been 35 adverse pregnancy outcomes. That's a preterm birth, a miscarriage, a spontaneous abortion, related to women, pregnant women taking the vaccine, and 25 birth defects. This is out of 925 deaths that have been reported overall, and 300 of those deaths occurred within 2 days of getting the shot. These are just the short-term effects. Also, some reports of permanent disability. And don't forget that COVID-19 vaccines have not been approved for pregnant women. They're being distributed without the full approval from the FDA on an emergency approval basis. And according to the National Vaccine Information Center, as of February 18, there have been an additional 46 complications reported by pregnant women who have received a COVID-19 vaccine. That's anything from stillbirth, premature delivery, spontaneous rupture of amniotic fluid, abnormal fetal heart rate, and so forth. So this is an underreported story, an underreported dimension of this story, that there may be risks to pregnancy and to the babies that women are carrying if they take the vaccine. Dr. Shelley Cole, who's an MD, she's an OBGYN, she's a member of America's Frontline Doctors, says, this is a concern. If you're a medical doctor, you have a vaccine that is still in an experimental phase. Yeah, the FDA has signed off on it for use on an emergency basis, but that's an admission that it hasn't been fully vetted. So she says, like, what we're doing here is we're throwing science and the scientific method out the window, and we're jeopardizing women and the babies that they carry. Even the CDC says that there are no studies talking about the impact of the vaccines on pregnancies. But they're saying it's okay to get it, and you don't even need to discuss it with your doctor. You know, and this doctor says, look, this is the opposite of everything that the scientific models and methods and standards of care have been for over a century. So much for following the science. And she says, look, if you're pregnant and you're looking for a safe treatment, prophylactic treatment, preventive treatment for coronavirus, take hydroxychloroquine. It's been used since 1944. It's completely safe to use by pregnant women and breastfeeding women. So that's frontline doctors in support of the use of hydroxychloroquine. Now, on the voting front, the Georgia State Senate has passed a bill. Remember, in Georgia, it's the Republican officials, the governor, Bryan Kemp, is the problem. The Secretary of State, Wayne Raffensperger, he's the problem. They're both Republicans, but they're the ones that facilitated all of the widespread voter fraud that we saw in Georgia. You know, with poll workers waiting until everybody else left and then pulling suitcases stuffed with ballots out from under tables. But the Georgia Senate is moving to take care of that. They've passed a bill that will abolish no excuse mail-in voting, no excuse absentee voting. Now, it passed along partisan lines. Republicans want to secure elections. Democrats want to cheat. That's the bottom line. Republicans want safe and secure, legitimate elections. Democrats want to cheat. This is the main tool to cheat, mail-in ballots, so they voted against it. Now, this is a procedure. This law that they have proposed, well, it's passed the Senate, would only permit mail-in balloting for those who were over the age of 65, who have a physical disability, or who are out of town. And if you wanted to get an absentee ballot, you would have to provide proof of identification, like a driver's license or a state ID number. You know, and the state Senate majority leader said, look, even with these restrictions, there are still 2.8 million Georgia voters who would still be eligible to vote absentee if that's what they chose to do. But again, you know, of the 6 states where we had real widespread voter fraud, 5 of them have legislatures that are dominated by Republicans. And remember, it's the state legislatures, according to the Constitution, that actually run statewide elections. You might have heard about this story. National Guard in D.C. has been eating raw meat with metal filings mixed into it. This is a report in The Hill. And listen to this. The Pentagon on Monday said that no moves are being made to remove any company from food service operations after National Guard troops assigned to protect the U.S. Capitol got sick from eating tainted meals served to them last week. So the bureaucratic process said there's nothing wrong here. This food is fine. That's what bureaucrats will do. I mean, they're trying to protect an $11.5 million contract. Sardi's Catering in College Park getting $11.5 million to provide these meals to National Guard soldiers. They don't want anything tampering with that. They got bureaucrats that will say, no, this food is just fine. Nothing is going to be done about it. That's Joe Biden showing his concern for the troops. And the undercooked food has continued to appear, according to The Hill, in guardsmen's meals this week. The sergeant of the National Guard said on Monday that the meat for dinner on Sunday was raw. And their commanding officers are telling them not to eat the meals for the next 2 days and eat MREs instead. So our soldiers now that are guarding Fort Pelosi are having to buy their own food until this snafu gets worked out. Speaking of socialism, this is a story from Nevada. What's that, Jeff?
Oh, nothing.
Oh, nothing.
So moving on.
Moving on.
Moving on. Yeah.
The entire staff, get this, the entire staff of the Democrat Party quit after socialists in the Democratic Party won every key leadership position in the Democrat Party. This is the entire staff of the Nevada Democratic Party quit Saturday. And employees got severance pay and so forth. But progressive socialists, they won all 5 leadership positions within the Democratic Party. These candidates were backed by the local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. So when they say socialists, that's exactly what they mean. And enough Democrats there in leadership said, look, that's not where we're at. We may be Democrats, we might be progressive, but we are not socialists. So they have quit the party altogether. You know, here's a suggestion I read, it's in the Federalist, that maybe what we ought to do is to keep Joe Biden locked up in the basement purely for national security reasons. Because if our enemies watch him try to conduct a press conference, they will think this is the time to take him out. You got Democrats who are saying we got to get the nuclear button in the hands of somebody else. We can no longer put the nuclear button in the hands of the commander-in-chief. He's likely to forget where he is, to forget what he's holding, think he's playing Mario Kart with his granddaughter, and hit the red button and set off an atomic bomb. For an example, here's Joe Biden clip number 4. He just nominated a guy to be the Secretary of Defense. Lloyd Austin is his name. And Lloyd Austin heads the Pentagon. But Joe Biden can't remember either his name or the Pentagon. So here's what that sounded like, clip 4.
I want to thank you both, and I want to thank the former general. I keep calling him general, but the guy who runs that outfit over there. I want to make sure we thank the secretary for all he's done to try to implement what we just talked about.
Okay, couldn't remember the guy's name. I think you know the guy. You know the thing. You know the guy, and you know the place that he runs. You know all about that. I don't have to tell you that. I'm not going to waste your time trying to actually remember that. So anyway, Joe Biden, I think actually could be a menace to our liberty if he isn't removed from this position, because our enemies are going to take great comfort from knowing that he is virtually dysfunctional as a commander-in-chief. Jeffrey?
You know what else he said during that same speech? He announced on Monday, which happened to be International Women's Day, that the U.S. military will be focusing on maternity flight suits for pregnant women. Now, how do the Democrats come up with being the party of women? I mean, is it important that pregnant women are allowed to fly during wartime?
Yeah, let's strap a mom who's pregnant with her baby, put her in a jet fighter, and send her into combat, pulling G's right and left.
Exactly. That can't be good for her baby. It can't be good for either one.
No.
You know? That's just insane.
Yeah. All right, very quickly, before we get to the end of the segment, I want to just briefly catch up to speed on what's going on in Minneapolis. They're trying to identify and seat a jury in the second-degree murder charge against Derek Chauvin. I don't think they're going to be able to make that stick. I read you stories of legal experts at the time saying this has been overcharged. You cannot, given the facts, what we know, you can't make a second-degree murder charge stick, because in order for that to stick, you have to be committing a felony when it happens. Well, he wasn't committing a felony. He was doing his job. He was using a restraint technique that he was taught by the Minneapolis Police Department to use when you have an uncooperative suspect. So that wasn't going to stick. So now they're going to try to hang a third-degree murder charge around his neck and see if they can get away with that. But meanwhile, they've already had a shooting death in George Floyd Square. segregated groups are not discriminatory. Whole new definition of racism. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Focal Point with Bryan Fischer.
Bryan Fischer.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio, the home of the fastest 60 minutes in American media. You know, what we've seen, ladies and gentlemen, in our culture right now, it's just reaching a crescendo under the Joe Biden administration. The LGBT agenda has the wind of the presidency behind it. We're talking about gender transitioning of minor children being pressured in to taking puberty blockers, undergoing surgical mutilation in a futile attempt, futile because it doesn't work, to change their sex. We've got a lot of abortion propaganda. We have suppression of free speech through the cancel culture. I call it the obliteration culture because they don't want to just remove people. They want to remove people from the face of the earth. So who's pushing back against all of that? Seems like we don't have warriors out there that are pushing back against this radical left-wing socialist agenda. But in Texas, there is a group that is pushing back against this. It's Mass Resistance, Texas chapter. Mass Resistance, one of my absolute favorite pro-family groups on the planet, headed by Bryan, one of my friends and one of my absolute heroes. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the SWAT forces, the Delta forces of the pro-family movement. They go right to where the political bullets are flying and get right involved in the fray. Pleased and honored to welcome again to our focal point decision maker line, Tracy Shannon. She works with Texas Mass Resistance, and she's got an update on what Texas Mass Resistance is doing to help deal with this in the Lone Star State. Tracy, welcome to Focal Point.
Thanks for having me on, Bryan.
Well, listen, tell me what you guys are planning on doing right now. You guys aren't sitting idle watching this unfold. Texas Mass Resistance getting right in the middle of this thing, in the trenches to try to stop this radical left-wing agenda. What are you guys up to tomorrow?
Well, today and tomorrow we're at the Capitol lobbying our representatives. We have citizen lobbyists that have joined from around Texas to go and talk to representatives today specifically that are sitting on some of the committees, hearing some of the bills that we're for or that we're against. Texas is facing several sexual orientation, gender identity bills. So we are going to talk about why we oppose those types of laws that are forcing all Americans to embrace and live out certain beliefs about human sexuality. Those kind of laws they're not protecting freedom of people. They're actually about coercing others to support and facilitate and endorse LGBTQ behavior. So we're doing that. We're also, you were talking about the gender transition of minors, and so we're pushing back on that. But Texas does have two bills already filed and in committee, in the Public Health Committee, and we are supporting those. One would designate certain treatments such as puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for minors as abuse, and the other bans the chemical transition of minors and surgical transition of minors. So those would be two things we really want to get hearings on and get testimony given and get these passed in the state of Texas. Unfortunately, Texas is not leading the way. Everyone thinks we're the most conservative state, but Alabama and other states are leading us on this very important issue that protects children.
Yeah.
So we want to advance the cause of save James and children like them that are being put on the medical pathway. And once put on the medical pathway, most of those children will live their lives out as patients and have surgery for life with lots of consequences.
Yes. Well, and part of the tragedy, I'm talking here with Tracy Shannon of Texas Mass Resistance, part of the tragedy is all the research indicates that most teenagers will grow out of this dalliance with gender transition by the time they end their teenage years. There's no need for surgery. There's no need for hormones. There's no need for extensive counseling. They will migrate out of this naturally, most of them, 80 to 90% of them. Well, Tracy, and you're right.
They have the affirmation model. It's almost 100% of the time they're going to transition. If you do watchful waiting, over 80% of the time they'll become comfortable with their God-given sex. So we need to push back against that and go for watchful waiting, which gives kids time. Kids need time. I mean, really, these surgeries shouldn't be done on anybody. It's medical malpractice as far as I'm concerned. But we're pushing several items here in the Capitol, and one of them is pushing back on the cancel culture that you talked about in your opening. We want that to be designated as harassment. When people call someone's jobs and say, somebody said something on social media, but those people have no business with that business at all, and have done no business with that employee. And the only reason they have ever had contact with that employer is to call and say that this person they disagree with, made a post that they think is bigoted or whatever. We want that to be designated as harassment, because Texas Republicans should be supporting and protecting the free speech of all Texans, of both parties.
Well, to understand, Tracy, and one more question before I let you go. Understand that you guys have developed actually a list of 16 legislative priorities that anybody, I'm assuming, could pick up no matter what state they live in, and use those legislative priorities to develop a strategy to approach the legislators in their own state and see about making some progress on these issues. How could one of our listeners get hold of that list of priorities?
They can contact Mass Resistance, and they will get a copy of our priorities to them by email, and they can go to www.massresistance.org to make contact with our organization. If they're from Texas, Mass Resistance will put them in touch with me so they can get to work. In other states, we're happy to talk about how we're doing this more specifically with people who want to lead in their state.
Great, Tracy. Tracy Shannon with Texas Mass Resistance. You know, Alabama and Montana kind of out in front of Texas on some of these issues. And Texas Mass Resistance, with our good friend Tracy Shannon and Arthur Schaefer, they're part of that movement, are trying to get Texas to catch up and move ahead of these other states. We've got other countries out there, like Poland and Hungary. They're leading the world in pro-family policies, and we're desperately working to catch up. Well, Tracy, thanks again for being our guest here on Focal Point. God bless you, and look forward to a good report at the Capitol in Texas. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Bryan.
You bet. Tracy Shannon of Texas Mass Resistance, getting it done, boots on the ground. All right, let's see if we can grab some sound bites in the few minutes that we have left. This shows you where we're at as a culture. This isn't a sound bite, but in San Francisco, a reporter for a local news station was reporting on on car robberies. So he's doing a stand-up on a street corner about how many car robberies are taking place, and while he's live broadcasting this report on robbery, a guy comes and holds him up at gunpoint and takes his camera and takes off with it. So a little that's up to the minute news right there. You know, Walgreens is closing 10 stores in San Francisco because they cannot keep up with the shoplifting. There's no bail in San Francisco, so no matter what crime you commit, you get released right away to go out there and commit the same crime all over again. And speaking of Joe Biden and racial inequality and unemployment got worse in Joe Biden's first month, significantly worse. Unemployment fell among Asians, dipped slightly for whites and Hispanics, but it rose for blacks from 9.2% in January to 9.9% in February. And remember, under Donald Trump, the gap between blacks and whites in unemployment had narrowed to its slimmest margin ever under Donald Trump. You know, back to that Minneapolis thing for a second. Now, a poll was done by Ipsos and USA Today that only 18% of Americans support defunding the police. This is an idea that has just about zero support among the public. You know, and I mentioned this, that the First Lady of New York State, of New York City, she's pleading for citizens to intervene in violent crimes. That's a great way to get yourself killed. Yeah. That's why you have cops that are armed. That's why you have the Second Amendment, so people can defend themselves in situations like that. All right. Well, let's grab a couple of sound bites. Let's begin with Heather McDonald, clip number 1 and 2, talking about George Floyd and talking about some of the memes out there that the police are trigger happy, that blacks are being gunned down by cops at an alarming rate and all that kind of thing. So here is, and they just passed a George Floyd Policing Act and they talk about this. Tucker Carlson asked her, what's the downside, or what's the outcome? What is this George Floyd Policing Act? What is it going to lead to? Clip number 1.
It means passive cops and emboldened criminals, Tucker. It's based on the usual lie that racial disparities in policing are the result of police bias rather than criminal disparities in crime commission. Here are the facts about those crime disparities that the Biden administration and the Black Lives Matter industrial complex don't want you to know. In New York City, blacks commit about 3/4 of all shootings, even though they're 23% of the population. In Chicago, blacks commit about 80% of all shootings, though they're less than 1/3 of the population. In Los Angeles, blacks commit 44% of all violent crime, though they're 9% of the population. And in St. Louis, blacks commit 90% of homicides, though they're 46% of the population. These disparities are replicated in every American city, and they mean that the police cannot go where crime is happening to protect minority victims without going disproportionately into minority neighborhoods and interacting disproportionately with black criminals.
So notice what she's saying here. She's with the Manhattan Institute. She's written a book called The War on Cops. She's saying, look, if the cops are going to go where the crime is being committed, if the cops are going to go where there are victims of crime, they have to go in to minority communities because of the preponderance, the majority of these violent crimes are committed by African Americans. So if you want to protect people from that kind of crime, you have to go where those crimes are being committed. Here is clip number 2. She puts a spotlight here on the actual racism on the left. Clip 2.
The racism on the part of the left is incredible, Tucker. They seem to believe that if we talk about black criminals and black criminal offending, we're talking about all blacks. That is not the case. We're talking about criminals. The police are there to save the thousands of law-abiding, good black entrepreneurs, senior citizens, children who are just trying to go to school. And by tarring them as racist, you're consigning those people to terrible, fear-driven lives that will stunt their ability to seize the opportunities that remain still abundantly available in this country.
Okay, so that's Heather McDonald. I mean, we've talked about this before. There is no systemic racism in policing. None. It's undetectable if it's there. There is no systemic racism in policing. Now, here is Donald Trump, clip 3, talking about Harry and Meghan. You're aware of the uproar in the royal household over their comments about the royal family. Here is Donald Trump, clip number 3.
I'm not a fan of hers. And I would say this, and she probably has heard that, but I wish a lot of luck to Harry, because he's going to need it.
He's going to need it. They're both going to need it at this point. Now, Joe Biden has been slow to pull the trigger on control of the borders. It's running absolutely wide open. Jen Psaki is asked about this yesterday, and listen to what she says. I mean, this is a Donald Trump message. Clip 5.
I would say it's clear we need to work more on getting the message out and being very clear. Now is not the time to come. There is the majority of people who come to the border are turned away. Yes, we have changed the policies of the last administration as it relates to unaccompanied children, but the majority of families, adults, the vast majority are turned away at the border. And that is a message that clearly we need to continue to look for means and ways of getting out, more and more out to the region.
So she's saying, look, the vast majority of people that show up at our southern border get turned away. Who knew that the Biden administration was so heartless and so cruel to the stranger? So that's Jen Psaki, words coming out of her own mouth. Now let's play Tom Cotton. No, we don't have enough time to squeeze that one in. Tom Cotton saying, look, what we have here, we do not have catch and release. What we have is recruit and release, because the Biden administration has actually extended an invitation to everybody that was deported by Donald Trump. Yeah, we know you were deported by the orange man bad. You come back, we will roll out the red carpet for you, and everybody that Trump deported can get back in. But, oh, by the way, we need to tell people now is not the time to come here. Dizzying. Bow low before God, stand tall before man, stand in the gap, and never forget we are fighting a winnable war. See you tomorrow.
The views and opinions expressed